continue. This series of teachings is going to continue right through until Christmas. So there won't be any more weekend breaks. So I wanted to mention that. And then also on Labab Duchen, which is one of the most foremost important holy days in the Buddhist calendar, Geshe will be offering precepts. And because we are in a northern location, you won't have to get up that early because the sun does not rise that early. So the precepts will be offered at 7 o'clock. So I encourage you to come if you're interested in receiving the precepts. For those of you who are in other time zones, you're very welcome to come. If you want to do the precepts on your own at the correct time, we usually provide a link of Lama Zopa Rinpoche doing this ceremony. So you're more than welcome to follow along that way. Next weekend, I believe, is daylight savings time in this part of the world. That means that we will be meeting an hour later. So for people, I think Europe has its daylight savings times a couple weeks prior, but just be aware that if you sign in and you don't see anybody and you're like, where is everybody? It's because of the daylight savings time. So we'll be there in an hour. It's a bit of a funny weekend because the Haruka teachings are going to be before daylight savings times happens, and these teachings are going to be after daylight savings times happens. So that's just something to be aware of. I think that's all I have to say. Grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, make yourself comfortable. I'll invite Geshe down and we'll get started momentarily.
You're muted. You're still muted.
We're not hearing you, Kedrick.
There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I can remember the last piece. So it was Tashi Deli, greetings to all Dharma friends. Geshe hopes that you're all well, and he hopes that you are all happy. Oh, yeah. So Geshe said that as usual, his greetings, his Tashi Deles to everyone, and especially today, Anidroma, Venerable Droma, our sort of the newly ordained nun, he wants to offer his special greetings in particular to her and offer his congratulations. And he hopes that in her ordination she is stable and that she can bring forth very excellent practice. And all of the holy beings state the same thing, which is that we have come to this place that is more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Indeed, if you were to cover the complete earth that we reside on with jewels, their value would not equal the value of this precious human rebirth. And if we can keep an awareness of this precious human rebirth, then naturally we will be able to be happier. And what we'll find is if we maintain this awareness, a lot of things that are problems, a lot of things that are stress, these will naturally just be cleared away. And if we use reasoning to understand more and more why this precious human rebirth is more valuable, that understanding, that realization will become increasingly powerful, and we will have fewer and fewer problems. That will just naturally happen. And also that day and night, that self or this I that we are aware of, we understand that at the time that this self or this I is abiding in this human rebirth, we have tremendous power, which means if we do well, if we do positive things, we can come to a great result. But also if we engage in negativity, this has grave consequences. So if at the time that we have this human rebirth, we have a natural liking for virtue, we have a natural liking for the practices of love and compassion, we have a wish to be able to understand how others are more important than ourselves, we can say we are extremely fortunate. And so when we talk about the self and my mind, we understand that they can be led in these positive directions, but also they can easily be led into a negative direction, and that can become habituated. So we need to be aware of that as well. So we understand that this opportunity is particularly precious because what we are doing is we are building on those potentials, those small potentials of love, compassion within us, and we are traveling the spiritual path through which love, compassion, and bodhicitta can flourish and become greater and greater. So let us begin with placing our body and our mind in a relaxed state. I'm sorry, I realized that for the Tibetan listeners, I have to put the mic closer to Geshe. Sorry about that. So we'll begin by putting our body and mind in a relaxed state. All phenomena that are appearing, we see them as just like clouds in the sky. Clouds in the sky of the mind. Let those clouds just slowly drift away without grasping at them. My sky is vast and my mind is vast and unobstructed, just like the sky. Think about that incredible potential of vastness. And just like we understand that the nature of the sky is that clear expanse, it is not the nature of those clouds. In the same way, those thoughts that trouble our mind, the projections, the afflictions, and so forth, they are not the nature, the true nature of that mind's expanse. They're adventitious. You should understand that these difficulties, any of these projections, this stress and so forth, they're not the nature of the mind. These are just adventitious defilements. They can be removed. So while we have this human rebirth, we understand that in terms of these stains or defilements that are adventitious, part of our task is to diminish those as much as possible and to eventually clear them away completely. And connected with that, then this vast mind whose potential has been revealed, I will try to stabilize the minds of love and compassion within it. I will strive to do that. From my side, in order to be able to strive towards these three great purposes, I will request the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to do that. So we will recite the prayers Geshe said with a mind of joy. Tenpa chon den de jin je ba ja chon ba yon da ba zo be song ge re ba tong shab su den ba Gyo
Chomdende Deji Sheba Dachomba Yandaba Zobe Sanje Sheba Dan Shabsu Demba Dewa Sheba Shide Jemba Jibu Due Galo Jowa Lana Meba Ladam Minamgi Demba Sanje Chomdende Bejawa Shaja Dubala Chazelo Cheda Jazu Jiu Temba Chomdende Deji Sheba Dachomba Yandaba Zobe Sangye Sheba Dan Shabsu Demba Dewa Sheba Jide Jemba Jibu Due Galo Gyowa Lana Meba Ladam Minamgi Temba Sangye Chomdende Bejawa Shaja Dubala Chazelo Cheda Kyazu Jiu.
We'll do a short mandala offering. Refuge and bodhicitta.
Sanje Jedon Zogye Jenon La Jongju Bardo Dani Kyatsu Chi Dagi Chije Jibe Sonam Jola Benjir Sanje Jobar Shu Sanje Jedon Zogye Jenon La Jongju Bardo Dani Kyatsu Chi Dagi Chinyin Gibi Sonam Jola Benjir Sangi Jobar Shu Sanje Chedon Sogi Chenam Lai Jongju Bardu Dani Gyatsu Ju Dagi Chinyin Gibi Sonam Jola Benjir Sangi Jobar
뭐야, 다 너로서더니 다 너진에서 도단일 샤와니 사카디나 다소로 그러니까 디비칼이네 같이 뭐래 신기하레스.
So Geshe said, as usual, he mentions the activities at the beginning and the activities at the end. These are things that are particularly important to pay attention to when we are engaged in the practice of virtue.
어다 저지 신비칼이나요 로르 주프게타 코로나레시토라 베르세시 뭐와 또니도 비시라서 아니 선바하세요. 퓨처인 거라레스.
Semke?
뭐와
Moa?
또니도 비시라.
And the Buddha himself, he said that when one is engaged in the practice of virtue, it is particularly important to pay attention to the mind generation, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and the dedication. And of course, bodhisattvas, as they practice, their practice is far superior to ours. So they definitely incorporate these. So we understand that when our motivation is vast, that motivation is necessarily more powerful. And when that motivation is more powerful, the cause of that motivation will bring forth a far more greater result. And in fact, when we talk about activating the mind's potential, when we talk about activating the brain's potential, it is through establishing these practices that that is achieved. And so then when we are trying to engage the mind with virtue, we should understand from our experience that naturally there are many obstacles that arise. So we need to take a moment to clear away those obstacles. Yeah. Yeah. So think that you want to be able to sit down somewhere, like on a chair or on a cushion in a hall that is very crowded. But if every single one of those seats is full with a very difficult person, you are not going to be able to sit down. So this is an analogy that Geshe is using to show how we need to clear our mind of these unwholesome thoughts, which block the space for practice. And so there's a way to trick the mind so that we can create space in the mind, almost as if you have like a cinema hall or something and every single seat is full. You'll tell someone, hey, there's something really interesting to look at over there. They'll get up and leave their seat and then you can sit down. So we have to kind of create the space in the mind. So we are just going to take a moment then to settle the body and the mind. So as we still the mind, we can think of the analogy of the waves on the ocean. Once the wind stops blowing, those waves will naturally dissolve into the surface. So we'll still the thoughts in our mind to bring forth that peace. We can also think that, for example, if we have a glass of water with a lot of particles and things in it, those particles might float around, obscuring the water. But if we place the glass down and allow it to remain still, those particles will settle, allowing us to see through the clarity of the water. So think from stilling my mind in this way, any discursive thoughts, any unwholesome thoughts or disturbances, these have been just gently cleared away from the vastness of the mind. When the mind is clear and strengthened in this way, then we understand that it can achieve any purpose, any happiness. It can also clear away any difficulty.
Kaveri, Shonchesimi, Sanjiri, Sajmat, Kaveri,
And in this way, we can bring forth our natural potentials, the potential for liberation, the potential to become a bodhisattva, and the Buddha nature, the potential for complete enlightenment.
Sanjiri, Sajmat, and so the Mashman in the Kuala. We know I Sanjiri and I know Mashman Kuala.
In terms of these potentials within myself, it is because of not recognizing those potentials that I continue to wander in samsara. And when I think of other sentient beings, it is also from them lacking the knowledge of those potentials that they continue to wander within samsara, within cyclic existence. Thinking about how myself, how all human beings, how the devas, the celestial beings, the animals, all 6 types of beings within samsara, it is because of that lack of knowledge of their potential that they continue to circle. However, because they possess this potential for liberation, this potential for bodhisattvahood, this Buddha nature, all of those beings are precious and close to me. In terms of possessing the foundation for love, the foundation for compassion, the foundation for bodhicitta, every last sentient being possesses that foundation. And in this way, there is no difference between myself and other sentient beings. So bring forth this mind of bodhicitta, perhaps first thinking of those close to you. May I lead them all to Buddhahood, and then expanding that. May I lead all sentient beings to Buddhahood, to the state of complete enlightenment. For that, may I achieve Buddhahood. In terms of those unskillful minds, the faults of the mind, these thoughts are only powerful because of habituation, but they are not rooted in truth. For that purpose, for that reason, I definitely will be able to clear them away. The practices of method, the practice of wisdom, momentarily I lack habituation to these positive practices, but because method and wisdom are grounded in truth, the more I engage with it, the more powerful they will become. So with a joyful mind, think I will definitely achieve these aims. So we'll pause there. So that concludes Geshe-la's brief introduction and meditation, but he just wanted to alert you to the most important points that he included in there, which is that when it comes to the afflictions, we can definitely get rid of them. They are present, so present because oh, sorry. Not talking loudly enough, apparently. Sorry. Blissed out from the meditation. Okay, so the most important point is that in terms of those unwholesome minds, right, they are present due to the power of habituation, right? But they are not grounded in truth. And because of that, they can be cleared away. So if we compare them to things like method and wisdom, we understand that these unwholesome minds, that the afflictions, they have no solid reasoning behind them. Because of that, they are only powerful due to habituation. They are not grounded in truth. Love, compassion, wisdom, realizing emptiness, these are completely grounded in reasonings. In fact, they have countless reasonings behind them. Because they have a valid, reasonable basis, the more that we engage with them, the more and more powerful they will become. And it is because of that that Shantideva says in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara that there is nothing that does not become easier with familiarity, right? He's talking about those positive mental qualities. So Geshe said that then in terms of achieving that Buddhahood which we aspire to, we understand that this happens really based upon the paths of the beings of the three scopes, of the beings of the three capacities. But in today's talk, particularly, we are focused on the practice of the Bodhisattva vehicle. And these are presented in the King of Prayers in a way that are easy to study and practice. And in terms of how these came about, we remember the kindness of Sudana, right, who the sutra where the King of Prayers is located is talking about, and all of the efforts that he went to find his teachers. And we remember that Sudana, right, he had to work very hard over a period of many years, right, to find all of those teachers to be able to secure those instructions. So we recollect his great effort. Yeah. And so then in terms of how the text is divided, we understand that it is divided into the preliminaries, the actual practice, and the conclusion. And then so in terms of what we have covered from the preliminary practices, we covered the meaning of the title and so forth, as well as the brief homage or prostration and the more extensive homage or prostration. And so then in terms of the division of this, and in terms of the thing that we need to pay attention here, it is the cause of the it is the cause of the actualization of the prayers, or the cause of the actualization of the aspirations, which is the accumulation of merits, and the purification of obscurations.
나로서 전에 제와도 메로도 단 대화 가려가 이나 곧 그렇고 니네를 빌려가 제가 같이 뭐 지래 되니나 대법에 잡아라 아빠지 뭐지 다 내양 봐도 단담만 내서 뭐지 와 대파 통화지 좀 그거 알아서.
And so in terms of our actual aspirations that we make in the prayers, all of the practices that we want to achieve, these are extremely important, and that is what we are striving towards. However, we're going to encounter many obstacles. So it's extremely important, accumulation and purification, to be able to clear away those obstacles. And in terms of the practices of accumulation and purification, one of the ways that this is accomplished is through this important practice of the 7 limbs or branches. And many of you are familiar with the 6 preliminary practices, one of which is these practice of the 7 limbs. So Geshe said, whenever you sit down to engage in practice, whether you have time for a shorter session or time for a longer session, it is really excellent if you can try to practice these 7 limbs in every instance. So we understand the reason for this is because we have had many countless previous lifetimes within samsara, and we have accumulated all different types of karma, all different types of causes, and all of those abide as imprints within our mind stream. And for that purpose, it is not always easy to accomplish the aims of our practice, right? We need to clear away those obstacles. Yeah, and Geshe said they are called the 7 limbs because we understand that a person with complete limbs is able to accomplish tasks more easily, right? A person with incomplete limbs has great difficulty.
So
Geshe wants to make it clear that when we talk about worldly tasks, right, worldly tasks like physical tasks and so forth, yes, if you have incomplete limbs, it might be much more difficult. So this is by way of an example, but he wants to make very clear that in terms of the dharma of study and practice, a person who has incomplete limbs, this is not such an obstacle because this is something that happens on the level of the mind. Yeah, so Geshe said, there's definitely people who have like various disabilities or incomplete limbs and so forth, but because of their sincerity and focus in practice, their practice will be superior to many of us sort of able-bodied people who don't put in the same effort. So Geshe said that this explains the importance of the 7 limbs. We understand that when all of these 7 limbs are in place in a complete way, it helps us to engage in a complete practice of accumulation and purification, which helps us to achieve our aims. And if we all look at our countless if you look at all of our countless rebirths within samsara, right, we can see that one of the afflictions or delusions which has hindered us, which has compelled us into wrong ways of acting in negative karma, is the mind of pride.
So pride,
right, it will cause us to look down on others. It will cause us to have an inflated view of ourselves. And when we look down on others, we will accumulate various forms of unwholesome karma.
그게 저도 리버도 간갈 봐 님보진 와야지 거기에
And when we speak of the seven limbs, the practice of prostrations, it is said to be an antidote to pride. It is able to act as an antidote both to the cause of pride and to the results connected to pride. So it's a powerful purification.
어다 리지고니 좋아서 마비고니 좋아서 이지고니 좋아서 같이 다 이지고니 좋아서 같이
And we also know that we talked about the different types of prostrations, the physical prostrations of body, verbal prostrations of speech, and mental prostrations of mind. And it is said that actually it is the practice of the mental prostration, which is the key important one.
어다 이대야 보지 그때 뭐지 매나요 리야마도 때는 리야 리니부터 오즈만을 뭐지
Yeah, so Geshe said that if you're not clear in your mind when you're engaging in the practice of prostrations, then whatever nice words you might be reciting or how beautifully you may be bowing, right, that becomes something a little bit false if there's not the way of thinking behind it.
어디지래 때네 대존의 말에 때네 샤도 쇼를 손을 두이나요 소소 뭐센델을 리포를 손을 두이나요 뭐센델을 리포를 손을 두이나요 아니 원리 체들 자자가 이나요 자자가 있는 단지 대화도 어다들이 뭐
But Geshe said there are many different kinds of benefits on the worldly level, right? If we are someone who is worried about like our physical health, for example, we know that the practice of prostrations is an excellent physical activity that can contribute to both the health of our body and of our mind.
어다 대수 뭐지 어떤 리야고 저도 이제 샤다기 뭐지 할때 다 대소 소리야고요 말이에요.
So there are many people who like the practice of prostrations mainly because they think that it will help them to like reach a healthy weight or have a more beautiful body and so forth. But of course, you don't want that to be the main motivation when engaging as a spiritual practice.
어다 대소 저는 들어오 할래 비트는 겨와 대단히가 주시만 들어가고 말아 대다 같이 모서야 같이 보지래.
And if we're just thinking of that, for example, of like strengthening our body and engage in the practice, the merits that will accumulate are very, very limited, right? So we want to go beyond that. We need to be careful here. So you don't need to buy expensive exercise equipment or a gym membership or anything like that, right? If you are someone who is engaging sincerely in the practice of prostrations, right? That physical health will come naturally as a result of that. And so Geshe said some people, right, comprehending all of the spiritual as well as the temporal benefits of these sort of prostrations, they say, I still don't feel motivated. I still don't really have a wish to engage in prostrations because I think like I've got so much unwholesome karma accumulated, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Yeah. So that reluctance to engage in the prostrations, sorry, now the point is clear, that reluctance to engage in the practice of prostrations, right? That probably comes from like a latency or an imprint of something unwholesome, right? That even understanding the benefits, we don't want to engage. And so speaking about the prostrations as an antidote to pride and so forth, we conclude our discussion of the first of these 7 limb or branch practices, which is the practice of prostration. And so the second of the 7 limbs is the practice of making offerings. And so Geshe said that when we speak about the practice of making offerings, different texts, right, sort of divide or enumerate these practices of offerings differently. In the case of this practice of the king of prayers, they are delineated as 2 types of offering, surpassed offerings and unsurpassed offerings. So surpassed offerings are not the supreme types of offerings. That's why they are surpassable. We understand that there are different types of offerings that are superior to those. So that's why they are called surpassable.
lama tsonga pe chumi leshe nimbo ndo kese shigiri lana yoba lana meba kese mungo yo res.
Do
Do
lana meba. Do di lana yoba. Do di lana meba. And Geshe said that in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, Lekshe Ningpo, you will see that actually he also speaks of the different sutras or the discourses of the Buddha. And he uses these same categories of surpassable sutras and unsurpassable sutras.
Kolo tombo, kolo baba, kolo tamasin soyo arawas. Anindo lana yoba ndo kare.
So Lama Tsongkhapa in this text he gives an enumeration of the three turnings of the wheel. The first of the initial turning of the wheel of Dharma, the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, and the final turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And it is these three turnings into which the sutras are organized. And then he explains which of those sutras are surpassed or unsurpassed and why.
어떤 이야기야 가지고 기반 문제 나와서 소소소 그 아주 뭐 자제요 아이자 세좀 봐서 그런 도지 아주 대이 아마로 집어서 그런 아주 대이 세게 뭐야.
But Geshe said in the different Buddhist schools there's not necessarily agreement on all of this because of course the Chitta Mantra and the mind only philosophers, right? They hold certain sutras as supreme, but then the middle way philosophers, they hold other sutras as supreme, right? So this is a point of debate.
손지가 이나요. 다 손지가 가서 깔아 비야 할래자 전부 전에 반을 가서 비가고 제출하게 내지요. 니 진담을 못 볼수 있어. 스토르스 코드 미발라 때네.
So the Buddha himself
이나요. 초로서 내와 여보. 아까 히라 여보야. 이렇게 배제 돈에나 따지시쇼.
So the Buddha said that he had laid out sort of a vast banquet of all of these different teachings or sutras. And he laid this out according to the different capacities and affinities of sentient beings. But in terms of what should be taken as definitive, he encouraged practitioners to rely upon their own analysis and their own wisdom.
lana ye bicheva lana me bicheva lana ye bicheva sere ti kono cheva yanda oyoba lana me bicheva sere ta cheva yashu chindo yoba.
And so we understand that there are these two categories of surpassable and unsurpassable offerings. Lana yopa kandes, sorry. Yeah, and surpassable means that there are offerings that compared to those offerings are supreme. The unsurpassable offerings are the superior offerings.
Naza tomba no to chucho shema pama nyomba kewi chewa public choke jawa teta lanu cheba jo lana yebi cheba chuloka ni.
So Geshe said that we are going to read out these two verses, and the reason is because these two verses are actually the surpassable offerings. So I will read out these verses. It's on page 3 for those of you who have the text. Of these with endless oceans of excellence endowed with an ocean of wondrous speech, I sing praises to the greatness of all Buddhas, eulogy of those gone to bliss. We start here. Garlands of flowers I offer them, and beautiful sounds, supreme perfumes. Butter lamps and sacred incense I offer to all the victorious ones. Excellent food, supreme fragrances, and a mound of mystic substances high as Mount Meru, I arrange in a special formation and offer to those who have conquered themselves.
This one, all that cheva pashik chenda which is me dani da lana yebi cheva ta to chenda which me dani tani.
Yeah.
So
Geshe said that if you look at the verse in terms of these surpassable offerings, you may have noticed that there are sort of 10 separate things that are mentioned, but we can understand also that these are just like an initial enumeration, and we can think of all material offerings. Yeah. So it's not only 10, and those of you who make offerings, you know that, right? There are many other things that we can offer in the context of surpassable offerings. So garlands of flowers and so forth. Geshe said when we speak of these flower garlands, these are like of the flowers, made up of the flowers that we find in this world.
하고서는 매도 동바 사티 기절 되어 있어.
Oh, so Geshe said that, okay, so in this translation, we don't have it. Oh, in the Tibetan translation, there is an idea of pure flowers. So Geshe is just talking about what do we mean when we offer pure flowers? Well, if we think I need to make offerings to the holy beings, and for this purpose, like maybe we steal some flowers or we kind of get them dishonestly from someone when they don't belong to us, right? These are impure offerings. So those are not suitable to be offered. So it means offerings, flowers honestly procured. Those are the pure flowers that we offer. Dampati.
동바사 지티가 할레비트 비지 저저 말했어. 내가 그마자야 또 먹이 세퍼겐데 된내라 고질이 슈마이나 된다고 말했어.
So so pure is said that we procure them honestly, right? An impure offering of flowers would be, for example, if we stole them and so forth, as Geshe also mentioned, but also if we purchase them with funds that we secured through cheating people or being dishonest in our business and so forth. That would also make the offering impure. So for example, in our own life, if we are sort of working honestly and then we use the earnings from our work to purchase some flowers at the store that we offer to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, this is an offering of pure flowers.
와메도 동바 청와 동바 동바 강가리고 있다. 청와 동바 아스는 메도게 징한다고.
So when we speak of garlands, Geshe said, we understand that there are all different types of garlands, but here we are specifically speaking of flower garlands.
This one, I was sure to the Dean, Sejil never seen in love. Can it tell around the fingers of Chinamos over the last? Or that the Dimma. Tomba Sena. You do sure send it such what an invisible man never more wishing love.
Then it changes over it.
Nothing as I had you are, you do sure send what you are.
Ale, you don't Yeah, so I'm just looking at the Lotsawa House translation of this. And sorry, I'm sorry, I don't like to do this, but I think Geshe's teaching won't be clear. So in the Tibetan, it talks about offering loveliest flowers and beautiful garlands. In the translation we have, it's flower garlands. So there's no distinction there. And I apologize, probably offending somebody, hopefully. Maybe they must have had their reason, right? So it's important to differentiate the flowers and the garlands because we are offering flowers and garlands. And so what Geshe was saying in the teaching is we can offer many types of garlands, not just flowers, but when we offer garlands, they should not be made of substances, however beautiful, that somehow harmed sentient beings. So we wouldn't want to offer coral and garlands and so forth, for example, because those arose from the harming of sentient beings. And of course, any type of garlands, there had the similar reason with the flower garlands of, if we obtain them dishonestly or through theft and so forth, those are also improper to be offered. And beautiful sounds. So Geshe said the sounds of many beautiful instruments and so forth. And I would translate the next one as supreme fragrances, not just perfumes, because also the way that Geshe is explaining it, he said we can have beautiful incense, beautiful perfumes, anything that has a nice smell, this can be offered here. But of course, you don't want to offer something that has an unpleasant smell, right? You want to offer perfumes and fragrances with a nice smell. So Geshe said strong smelling things. So for those of you who practice certain classes of Tantra, right? You know that you can't eat onions or offer onions and so forth. So in the same way, right, you won't want to offer those strong smelling things, only things with pleasant fragrances.
this one, that you to say, do that's how I do Chabakaya, the Trinity, what you are was.
Marme.
What's our you to do? No.
Yes. And then we also have, I'm sorry to say, but actually this translation we have of the King of Prayers is missing many things, because there's also parasol that is mentioned actually. And we don't see that in this text. So Dave, can you bring up for people the translation from Lotsawa House? No? Okay. I just thought maybe he could put a link in there in the chat, because there's actually many things missing. Sorry, maybe I just want to talk to Dave for a second.
Hi, Kedripla.
Hi, Dave. Are you able to put
There
the
is
link?
the FPMT. The FPMT has a newer translation that it includes the things you're mentioning.
All right. Okay. So they've amended this then.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Can you email that to me and I'll have it for next time? I'm sorry about that.
I've done so already.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. No true kashi.
This one, that you to say that
So Geshe said we offer the parasols, right? Because these are things that benefit. They can block the sun when the sun is too hot. They can also stop the rain and so forth. So we offer these beautiful parasols. Yeah.
So you join the Inayo, Tamataman, there was so in the Yamachilla, she would equal the Vicachilla.
Oh, Shingola.
Pamato Kangachon, equal the Vicar. And then she doing Yamaka there was.
Yeah.
And then consider Yamapandosa in it, and then she did Tomatica. Sunjipa Yagamadis, Yamata what the garden, Yamapandosa in I know.
Yeah.
Because of the yes, Yatin was human.
Tombachon de Gijima Datum.
What an act,
Chinga, loso chinga, Shing nebasone. Yeah. So Geshe was saying that we offer these things, and we can also offer them mentally. For example, the parasols and so forth, because they create a profound cause. So Geshe was speaking about a special tree that the Buddha was taking rest under. And because the Buddha took rest under that tree, it became very powerful. Like if the sun was not blocked by the tree in a certain direction, it had this miraculous power, it seems, to make that shadow anywhere around it that beings needed.
Oh, that in the group the such more and
sorry, I need the whole story. I can't just have the point forms. My apologies. So, Geshe said he told this story before. I don't remember it. Anyways, so one of the things that happened, because the Buddha's father saw when the Buddha rested under that tree, that no matter where he moved, the shadow would follow him, no matter what the location of the tree or the sun was. He thought, oh, wow, my son is a really amazing being. And on that basis, he actually offered prostration to the Buddha. This is a very important story. And of course, especially in traditional Indian culture, the father is not going to offer prostration to the son, right? But the Buddha's father's mind was so moved that he offered that. I said, Geshe, please give me the complete stories, not the coolest notes. Yeah, and so Geshe said that this is actually one of the 3 times that the Buddha's father was said to offer prostration to him. And there's sort of 3 stories connected to these 3 different times where the Buddha offers prostration to his father. Yeah, so we also know that the Buddha's father was not necessarily so happy with what the Buddha was doing. And in fact, he tried to put a lot of obstacles into his path of spiritual practice. But as it came sort of to the end of his life, he developed a profound respect for the Buddha. Yeah. And so Geshe said also the practice of offerings, right? It may be that we are in cyclic existence for a while. So we need to be able to have the means to have some level of worldly happiness, right? So although it is not and should not be our primary motivation, the practice of making offerings also helps us with that. So Geshe said, that shouldn't be our main motivation, but we also know that from lifetime to lifetime, we want to have a reasonable standard of having decent things. So this also comes through the practice of making offerings. And the practice of offerings is really in harmony with the teachings of cause and effect, because we know that from the smallest to the biggest unpleasant thing and the smallest to the biggest pleasant thing, these arise from their particular cause. And it is for that reason that we need to engage in the practice of making offerings. So the next offering is the offering of the butter lamp. So this is made of a beautiful and a fragrant butter. And we know that that butter that we achieve, it should be it should be purchased by honest means, right? We don't want to steal it and so forth. And actually also offering the lamp, right? The flame of the lamp represents clarity. So offering lamps can also become a cause to achieve wisdom. Yeah. So offering lamps, it puts a good imprint for realizing wisdom, because we know that wisdom is said to be like the flame of the lamp. And Geshe is often given the analogy of the moment that we bring forth that realization of wisdom, no matter how long a particular room was dark, once the lamp is lit within it, it is completely illuminated. So in this way, offering the lamps creates a cause to achieve wisdom. So Geshe said also, when you have the practice of like turning the lights on in your room or in various places in your house, if you also have the mindfulness to think about this first as making an offering, you can accumulate many powerful causes for wisdom. Yeah, because otherwise, like the practice of turning on lights and so forth, even beautiful lights that we may have in our home that beautify the environment, they don't become a practice of virtue unless we try to transform the intention behind it. And there is a story connected with that we can tell later. So the next one is to offer pure or sacred incense. So all of the various incense that we can burn as an offering. I offer to all the victorious ones. So in this way, we have finished one verse that is speaking about these surpassable offerings.
어다 자와 대다는 제가 저 쇼잖아 주비 자와 대다 무치로 왔어. 자와 대다 자와 뭐 자와 지니 많이 봐. 쇼잖아 주비 자 자와 강갈 피니스.
So when we say I offer to all of the victorious ones, we understand we are not offering to just one holy being, right? To make it a more powerful accumulation, we offer to all of the victorious ones, all of the holy beings of the 10 directions.
어다 제와 되면 들어가서 다 제와 누른도 치 대마도 요 말할 때는 제와 지지고 많이 봐. 그런 것만 놓지 다 쇼잖아. 가서서 가제 배 너가 공원시 받으면은 그래서 피니스
Namga Kongsan.
너가 공원 너가 가자서.
And also Geshe said that when you're visualizing the practice, you don't imagine just a few of the butter lamps or whatever else it is that you're offering, right? You can imagine that those offerings fill the extent of space. And in that way, it becomes a most powerful accumulation.
다 나자 동바노도 저초동 나자 동바 다 손지거든요. 야, 어다 그러거든요. 지금 어서라서 받들이 필요하다. 다 도지들이 되게 그뭐 먼저 필요도 와서 지들이. 무슨
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I still got this mistaken one. I'm sorry, I'm going to read from the Lotsawa house because that's all I have. I don't have the new translation in front of me. I apologize, but hopefully people will follow. To every Buddha, I make offerings of exquisite garments and fragrant scents.
그래서 세리다 저 자와 이는 소지 지금 어서 생각나 와서 어다 드리와 필요한 생각을
Yeah. So Geshe said that these are the beautiful sort of Dharma robes and so forth. If we think of the Buddha, they are the beautiful Dharma robes and so forth that we offer.
어다 자와 도지대도 하사도 되지는 좋아로 보게 누르도 되지 가서 이거 자는 그냥 뭐 보기도 왔어.
So you'll see that, for example, if you go to Bodh Gaya or if you go to Lhasa, when you look at the holy Buddha images in those places, there's often a practice of the pilgrims offering beautiful garments to those images.
어다 때문에 소소 깔래자는 보게 다 변도 되게 되는 리드들이 나니라. 제가 이런 벌써 말마도 다 들어가서 그만에 누르도 말했어.
And similarly, if you purchase those beautiful cloths and those beautiful garments and so forth honestly, then you get great merit for it. But if you obtain those offerings dishonestly or through theft, it does not become a meritorious practice.
다 그바트 저초도 당길라 저지 놓다서 단달라 저지려서 대가를 저조야 도바용 주의하레스.
And once again, Geshe said, we now come to the offering of supreme fragrances or supreme scents. And Geshe said, you may wonder, well, we already had supreme perfumes or supreme scents in the previous verse. Why are the supreme perfumes or the supreme scents arising again?
다 당기듯이 뭐 저 파트 때때서는 담아다서니라.
So the first one, Geshe said, are perfumes that are made from taking various kind of chemicals or components and putting them together to make kind of like a fabricated perfume in a way.
야주기 저 생각도 배자는 이렇게 생겨요. 단대 쳐보면 다 레시기 저 단대 저 레시기 저 세 시코로 뭐니 서로 또 뭐니 저시 못하는 요게 진행하고도 다 그런 거들이 하고는 뭐요.
So these supreme fragrances are said to be the natural supreme fragrances of pleasant things. So if, for example, if you think of the sandalwood tree, you can think of the sandalwood oil and so forth, that as it appears from the tree, it already has that pleasant sense. So that is why the fragrances are mentioned twice. So Geshe said, powdered incense heaped as high as Mount Meru, or here in the text I have, it says a mound of mystic substances as high as Mount Meru. So Geshe said, what are those powders or what are those substances? Those are understood to be the things from the beautiful smelling plants, such as the sandalwood tree and so forth. These are dried and cut up into a beautiful powder. And it is actually that heap of Mount Meru-like powder of those fragrant substances that you are offering. So that is what should be understood here. So they have a special plant called the akara plant. They have the sandalwood plant, all of these plants that have like a very beautiful, pleasant fragrance there. It's a kind of powder that is made from the components of that plant or tree. And so that is what is piled as high as Mount Meru.
다 개비 쳐봐 밥이 쪽에 저와 대단한 쳐봐 저 개비 쳐봐 당기 때 당기 미 먹었다 다서 와 대단히 예비가 다 요 쳐봐 뭐야 요 좋아로 와서 대지 강가 생각했어.
So I arrange in a special formation. Geshe said that you can understand this as including a formation of all of those other offerings that you may not have mentioned specifically. So in this way, you are offering everything worthy of offering together. Yeah. And so we are offering everything accumulated as high as Mount Meru, but also covering the 4 cardinal directions and the 4 intermediate directions. And we go through all of these steps, right, to establish the profound vastness of that offering. Yeah. And the offerings that are mentioned here, these surpassable offerings that we're making, we're offering mainly things that we can see or experience with our sense consciousness within samsara, right? So things that are actually existing in the world. So we understand that nominally, right, these beautiful things within our world, within samsara, they are arising from karma, which means that nominally they are contaminated, but by picturing them and offering this way to supreme beings, that offering is actually very suitable and a powerful accumulation. Sorry, Lana Yopadi sena dunya demba yimba. And we understand, right, that those contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering. So those offerings that we make to the holy ones that are contaminated due to arising from karma and in the nature of suffering due to being contaminated, we offer those to the holy ones, and it's a powerful accumulation. But because of that fact that they are in the nature of suffering, they are surpassable offerings. So that is another way of understanding this word surpassable. Yeah. So Geshe said that when you say a surpassable offering, now you understand why it's surpassable, right? It's because those offerings are coming from karma, right? All the peerless offerings I hold up in admiration of those gone to bliss with the strength of faith in sublime ways. I prostrate and make offerings to the conquerors. And so these are the these are the unsurpassable offerings. So Geshe said, you see here that it talks about the vast and unsurpassable offerings. So you understand that the offerings are vast and you understand that they are unsurpassable. But the verse itself doesn't explain exactly why they are unsurpassable. Yeah, so the reason for the unsurpassability is not contained within the words of the prayer. Yeah. So Geshe said, just as he explains the meaning in the section on the surpassable offerings of pure and how we know if those are pure or impure, he would like to explain why in this verse the offerings are unsurpassable. And they can be deemed to be unsurpassable based upon 4 things: their cause, their nature, their aspect, and their function. I'll give that to you again: the cause, the nature, the aspect, and the function.
제가 인지 메지 제가 맞아는 게 단기 때가 로자 아니라
Loso,
제가 걸어
Chepakoro.
단기 미때 단기 먹고 로송아스 먹고라
Yeah.
얘노지 연발라
Yeah.
다 점만다와 뭐 만다와 너만 만다와 또 제가 비비가 아니다
Yeah.
나는 메비 치원다야
And so Geshe said, when you are thinking of these unsurpassable offerings, you don't need to offer different things from those that you previously offered. For example, you can offer the flowers and the incense again, but it is with the mindfulness of that in the context of unsurpassable, they have a different cause, nature, aspect, and function. That makes the offering unsurpassable.
나는 메비 제가 갈래는 메도 제가 간디스 인거래 달라바이나 아니 존재 셈바 파파스는 또 파파들에 되니 존재 셈바 가리나 가지고 이거 시키잖아
Loso.
또 파파 코로스 그 띵에도 고미 또래 아까 살아서는 주된 주의겠던 메도 들 소노 또네라 어피야들이가 아레스.
So if we take flowers as an example, how can we think of flowers as offerings in the unsurpassable context? Well, Geshe said you can take a bodhisattva, probably an Arya bodhisattva, though perhaps any bodhisattva, based upon that bodhisattva's single-pointed meditation. If they offer flowers or something in that meditation, because of that power of concentration, those become unsurpassable flowers. So those are the types of flowers we can offer. Yes, and we can apply the same reasoning, Geshe said, to the flowers, to the flower garlands, and to the other offerings. So Geshe said this is an easy way to apply that reasoning to make those offerings unsurpassable, right? You can think of the flower garlands, you can think of the incense and so forth, and you can think offered by the flowers or the incense of the bodhisattvas in that state of single concentration. I offer up those. That becomes an unsurpassable offering. So from the point of view of the cause, how is this unsurpassable offering of the flowers, for example, different? Well, because in the surpassable offering, we were offering flowers that are connected with samsara and arising connected with karma and affliction. The flowers that we are offering here of the Arya Bodhisattva, they are not arising due to karma and affliction. They are arising from the unsurpassed motivation of the Bodhisattva and through their roots of virtue and power of meditation. So in that way, they are unsurpassable flowers. So when we speak, for example, of the Pure Land of Sukhavati, the land of great bliss, we understand that everything there arises from the holy mind of Buddha Amitabha. So the flowers there and so forth, they are also unsurpassable because they arise through the power of the aspirations, vows, and concentration of Buddha Amitabha. And so we mentioned unsurpassable, but we also mention vast in this verse. So how are these offerings both unsurpassable and vast? When we think of vast, we think of the limitless offerings of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. So how can we conceptualize the offerings of Samantabhadra as being unsurpassable? We imagine that from the heart of Samantabhadra, countless, limitless light rays emanate out to all directions. at the end of every single one of those light rays is another Samantabhadra who offers up the flower garland, the incense, and so forth. And in this way, those offerings become unsurpassable. And sorry, those offerings become vast, not unsurpassable. Those offerings become vast. And also those offerings become vast from our side when we offer them with a mind infused with both faith and joy, infused with both faith and joy. That will make the offerings more vast.
Yeah.
So Geshe said that if you understand how these are connected to the mind, right, to these different ways of thinking, then even if you're a person of very limited material means, if you're quite poor, your offerings can be the same as the offerings of a person who is very wealthy. So Dzong Rinpoche once said that when it comes to the practice of Tantra and Tantric visualizations, do not visualize limited means if you are a poor person. You have to pretend that you are a wealthy person who is offering everything up. So that is the way to think about it. So Geshe said that up to this point, then, we have covered the offering section of the 7 limbs. And I am sorry about that, my text. I will print the new revised text for next time.
So
Geshe said, hopefully that gives you an idea about these different kinds of offerings. And if something isn't clear to you, you can read it over again, and hopefully that will clarify. But also, please ask questions. And Geshe said also really understand that for both our temporary and our ultimate aims, constant practice of accumulation and purification of obscurations is something that is really important. So Geshe said, and also if we want to really bring forth powerful realizations, then we come to this important text, which is in praise of dependent origination. I just need to find the text. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Just.
So Geshe
said we're going to just go quickly through the second verse again, because we covered it last time, but not in depth. So verse number 2, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So Geshe said when we speak about, Jigten Gula Jiniepa, Dembajitang Jawa. Dembajitang Jawa Candidio. So whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. If you relate this to the 4 noble truths, Geshe said, you will be able to come to a good understanding.
This one,
and so these particular parts of the text, Geshe said, some scholars explain them according to a presentation of the 4 noble truths, and some scholars explain them according to a presentation of the 12 links of dependent arising. Whatever degenerations there are in the world relates to the first of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering.
So
the world, Geshe said, actually refers to samsara, right? Whatever sort of corner of samsara we look at or find ourselves in, it is degenerated because it is in the nature of suffering.
And remember,
in the sutra related to the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha himself proclaimed suffering should be known.
This one, how did you
ask me how this is related to the four? Yes, the root of all of these is ignorance. So this relates to the noble truth of the origins of suffering, or true origins, is how most of the scholars say it, true origins. So we understand that the origin of suffering is karma and affliction. In terms of the two of karma and affliction, which is more prominent, it is affliction. And in terms of the affliction, the root of all of the afflictions is ignorance. So if you don't want this suffering, if you want to get rid of all of these difficulties, the root of these difficulties is ignorance. So it is that ignorance that you need to take care of. So can I get rid of the ignorance grasping at the self by making a lot of prayers that I'll get rid of it, or by doing some sort of special puja? No, we can't get rid of ignorance just by doing that. It is only through bringing forth our own wisdom that we are able to do this. So here is the wisdom in the terms of the dependent origination. If we are able to bring forth an understanding of that, then we will be able to clear away that ignorance. And so then we come to the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. That is true paths. So we have true cessations and true paths. So you taught that is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So the you is Buddha Shakyamuni, right? This is who Lama Tsongkhapa is speaking of in this verse. So Geshe said that in terms of understanding this, in relation to the Four Noble Truths, this is something that we can see both within the sutra itself, as well as in the text of the Sublime Continuum, or the Uttara Chantra Shastra. So both the presentation of the sutra and the presentation of Uttara Tantra start with the first noble truth as being the noble truth of suffering. In the text of the Ngunta Jenjwa, Ornament of Clear Realizations, or Abhisamayalankara, the first noble truth is actually given as Kunjung Nembarwa, true origins. Ale. So Geshe said it's giving as like a cause and effect in a presentation within the Abhisamaya Lamkara. So we understand that the cause of understanding true origins has the effect of clearing away suffering. So that's why it's presented like that. So the Four Noble Truths can be enumerated according to two methodologies. The first methodology enumerates the Four Noble Truths according to cause and effect. And the second methodology enumerates the Four Noble Truths according to the order of practice. I'm sorry, Gyunjegi Denpajidi Tambokareje? Yeah. So the presentation, I just wanted to make it clear for you folks, sorry. So for the presentation of the Four Noble Truths according to cause and effect, the first noble truth is true origins. For the presentation of the Four Noble Truths according to the stages of practice, the first noble truth is true sufferings.
And Geshe
is also mentioning that in terms of the Pramanavartika, the treatise on valid cognition, it is also giving the first noble truth as true sufferings. Is destroyed by the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So the dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance, is mainly talking, Geshe said, about the subtle dependent origination. So Geshe wanted to talk a little bit more about this dependent arising. Tenjung, Tawa Tokpadang Tawe Chöpa Zoparwa. He wanted to talk about the Tenjerwa. Yeah. So Geshe wanted to talk about cognizing this view or cognizing this understanding as a first step, and then finally the fulfillment of the view's analysis. Yeah. So when the practitioner has a conceptual cognition of the view of dependent arising or emptiness, that is a very important step, but they have not yet reached the fulfillment of the view's analysis. So in terms of if we take emptiness as the example here, in terms of the final view of emptiness, the practitioner, he or she has cognized that. They have cognized that final view of emptiness. But they haven't yet been able to apply that cognition of the view of emptiness as an assisting factor to dependent arising. Yes. If they look at dependent arising, they may be able to see and understand that dependent arising, to cognize it, but they aren't able to use it as an assisting factor in emptiness. So the practitioner, as they meditate upon dependent arising and emptiness, they'll continue their analysis, they'll continue their meditation. And when they come to a certain point, whenever they meditate upon dependent arising, it reinforces as an assisting factor their understanding of emptiness. Whenever they meditate upon emptiness, it naturally acts as an assisting factor to their understanding of dependent arising. It is when the practitioner reaches this point that they are said to have reached the fulfillment of the view's analysis.
이 토르는 고자세 한에도 요바 레전드 요바라 소바 가제도 요
So when we are practicing, Geshe said, maybe not meditative equipoise on emptiness because we are maybe beginner practitioners, but when we are practicing our meditation, our mindfulness of emptiness based upon an object's lack of inherent existence, yeah. So as we think about its lack of inherent existence, its emptiness, we can also bring into that contemplation the fact that it exists conventionally as a dependent arising. So Geshe said this is not an easy thing to understand, but as we continue with our meditations on emptiness, they will act as an assisting factor to dependent arising. As we continue with our meditations on dependent arising, they will act as an assisting factor to emptiness. When we reach that point where they are assisting each other, this is the fulfillment of the view's analysis. This particular point is an uncommon characteristic of Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching. Really? So Geshe said also, you don't have to think that this is only something that's achieved by very high up realized beings. This can happen for the practitioner who has that initial correct cognition of emptiness. Yeah. So we have in this way covered our brief discussion of this text in praise of dependent origination. So Geshe said, if you take one thing away from the discussion of this text of dependent arising, maybe you take away the easier thing, which is how we can relate each of the lines of this verse to the Four Noble Truths, and also just keep in mind that they can also be related to the 12 links of dependent origination. So we are going to dedicate the merits, and please, after the dedication, if you need to get on with your day, feel free. If you'd like to hang around for questions, you are very welcome. Jangjo Senjo Rinpoche Maje Panam Jeju Chepa Nyamba Mepa Yang Gone Gondu Pewa Arsho Tongni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Panam Jeju Chepa Nyamba Mepa Yang Gone Gondo Pelwarisho Jambe Pao Jidar Kemba Tong Kundu Zambo Deon Dejende Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Je Gewa Dida Tongje Rabdungo Desun Shebi Gyawa Tomje Ge Ngawa Gana Chodo Mabade Dagi Gewe Tsawa Digurgyo Zambo Jeje Radu Ngawa May the sun of happiness shine upon all 6 types of beings within samsara without exception. On the basis of all of the offerings that we've made together today, through the merit of this, may all of our difficulties be cleared away and our difficulty of lack be cleared away. May we have everything we need. Through the roots of merits that we've accumulated together today, may every single abode within samsara become exactly like a pure light. So we'll pause there. I'll just turn the volume on. We can take some questions. Yes. So yes, please go ahead with questions if there are some.
Yes, hello there, Kedrup. I have a question for you.
Paul, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So my question regarding dependent arising or lack of inherent self-existence or emptiness. So if I remove or reduce the significance of the perceptions of, say, my body, my mind, and my speech, then the existence of the I is not found. So therefore, is it true that the I is a self-made idea in the mind and does not have true existence? Would this be accurate?
Yes, I will. Geshe will give you a good answer to this, but you are definitely in the right direction, Paul. Nganso di perna nganso di tenchung tang rangching di mepa solo samlo tang narwa. Di sen nganso dag serie di kawa yores rwa. Then nganso di sem tang wangpo din so nangla yomares. Nganso lupo di nanglo la yomares. Then dag serie di ngarang di sopare matok. Tak yomares, dabochik samlo tangna diaborebes, chotadarebes.
Teta ro mare.
Yeah.
Me nazo gwaja da chikares.
Yes.
Gwaja da de ngaro so jar mado.
Yeah.
Ni ne tsri mares.
So Geshe is clarifying here, Paul, that in terms of the I that is the object of negation, in other words, the perception that we need to get rid of, yes, it is that I that is the object of negation that is completely self-fabricated. It does not exist at all.
그래서 이나 영어로 서 다자 매바 레서 고다자 매바 마레스. 그mon가라 때네 다비가 다니 나나시 아디와레스.
But does that mean that there is no I or self at all? No, there is not. That is not the case, because there is an I that is designated dependently upon the five aggregates: form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness.
어텔리라고도 모두 와서 나도 여와 비치도 고만 기반 무지 버게 로이 차리와 이더 코히와샤 릴라고 모두 되다.
And so Geshe said to differentiate that self-fabricated I that is the object of negation from this dependently designated I, which is nominally existent, it is very difficult to kind of ferret those two out from each other, because in terms of our mind, of our perception, they're mixed together like milk and water. And this is another actually uncommon feature of Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching, is this emphasis on recognizing the self that is the object of negation. Tsongkhapa thinks that's very important. And Geshe said to actually, as we go through, right, our meditation, our analysis, to bring forth this idea of the self within the mind, which is the object of negation, really correctly, that is actually something that is quite difficult. It takes quite a bit of work. It's not so easy. In the advice of the masters, it is said that when one is in a state of extreme happiness, elation, or a state of extreme misery, suffering, if we think and try to conceptualize the I, that self-fabricated I that is the object of negation, when we are experiencing that extreme happiness or suffering, it is said to be easier to identify the object of negation. Yeah. So Geshe said that in the beginning, right, when we try to develop an understanding of this I that is the object of negation, we can think about an I that is permanent, independent, not arising because of other things, right? Stable and so forth. This is a good doorway into an easier contemplation of that. So the just in a nutshell, Paul, the I that is the object of negation, the self-fabricated one, and then the I that is designated dependently. We have to differentiate between those two. We have this idea that the I or the self is something that has arisen in a stable and solid way and is completely independent of any other factors. That's the I that is the object of negation, because of course there is not an I or a self that is independent and unchanging. However, there is an I that is designated in dependence upon this grouping of the five aggregates. The I that is the object of negation, you are correct, is something that is completely fabricated by mind. It does not exist at all. So hopefully, Paul, that gave you a beginning of the conversation in terms of your question.
Thank you so much. I realize it's a huge subject matter. I wonder if I could squeeze in a follow-up question to this.
Sure, go ahead.
To this, this object of negation is the source of many of our sufferings. Would that be correct because of this self-fabricated I?
Nanso gakshagi dag seriadi nanso dungelgi gu so dabuchi kres karin sana nanso di yiche chena dene dungel mambo yongi re duas di lamna digiribes. Yes, Geshe would just go a bit further and would say this conception of the self that is the object of negation is the source of those sufferings. Yes. Because it is a completely mistaken way of thinking, right? Then it is also feeding in and strengthening all of the other afflictions such as attachment, aversion, and so forth as well. Yeah, so Geshe said all of the afflictions, in a way, they are kind of like the servants of this fundamental misperception. And you could even say that the afflictions are kind of its branches.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, Paul. Next question.
Go ahead, Ernest. And then I have a couple of questions from I have a couple of questions from Facebook. We'll go ahead, Ernest.
Thank you, Dave, and good morning, everyone.
Morning, Ernest.
In regards to clarifying the offering practice of unsurpassable and possible, and over the years, I don't know, I want some clarification on whether I'm doing the offering practice correctly and in terms of my visualization. When I offer offerings that are surpassable, I visualize the deities or the Buddhas or whoever I'm offering to, or the field of accumulation. I visualize them accepting it. By visualizing them accepting the offering, does that convert the offering to unsurpassable in that process?
Yeah. Yeah, that's your question. Yeah. Arunis the chupa pulia kola di dabusona digiribes. Nazo lana yupadam lana mepa chubagi kebarchik duarwa. Dene korangi samlo tantang datarebes. Nazo se tabi perna at sokshinyena. Nazo di hidamgi lachikena. Dene nazo di chupa puldu rwa. Lana yupe ki chupa redua. Dene kebu dampa denso chupa di kelengiris. Dene chupa di kelengiris konso chupa di nyamne. Dene lana yupa di lana mepa chajo girebesa. Konso chupa di nyamne, chupa di kelene. Kelenya la tene lana yupa lana mepa chatu girebesa.
Kilemba la tene la chava korol ana maybe chava to chava marwas.
Yeah.
Ina korosol tela tene dewa mandawa. Yeah, the reason to na.
Sakchiki dewa marero.
Samegi dewa so to na.
So Geshe-la's answer here, Arunis, is that merely by their acceptance of the offering, that does not change the surpassable offering to the unsurpassable offering. However, if you talk about the experience of bliss that they are experiencing, because they are holy beings, they are experiencing an uncontaminated bliss. So while the offering may be surpassable, because they're holy beings, the bliss that they experience is uncontaminated.
미치와 코로페나 메도 나와치는 메도 코로다 디마테메 로지사 코타가 로게 로서 카고마라와스.
Yeah, because Geshe said actually when we offer up the flower, right, if we've taken this like kind of worldly conventional flower, right, it arises due to cause and effect, so it's the nature of suffering. So you know, just offering that without doing anything to transform it, that can't change it from surpassable to unsurpassable.
다 이나 키들 미야토와 이야 마치들이.
But Geshe says that he likes your question because it can take us in a different direction. Yeah. So there is a method. There is a method to do this. Yeah. Ro. Ale, Yeah. It made Geshe think of the 4th chapter of the Abhisamaya Lamkara, the ornament of clear realizations, where it says that a person who offers terrible tasting food to the Buddha, the moment it touches the Buddha's tongue, it will become very delicious and in the nature of bliss.
So there is
So Geshe said you can't say the offering goes from surpassable to unsurpassable when it's accepted by the Buddha, but you can say that the way that the Buddha experiences that offering as uncontaminated bliss means that although the offering itself may be surpassable, the experience of bliss that arises due to the offering is unsurpassable. Listen. So Geshe wants to tell a short story connected with this. Yeah. So this is a story in ancient India from the time of the Buddha, and an evil king invited the Buddha and his Sangha to partake of a food offering. And possessed of evil mind, he actually poisoned the food. And of course, the king, he didn't understand that the Buddha was clairvoyant, so he actually knew what had happened. So he assumed that he had been successful in hiding the poison in the food when he invited the Buddha and the assembly. So as they sat down to eat, the Buddha instructed the Sangha, do not begin eating until I have shared a few words. So and at the moment all of the food was set out, the Buddha made a proclamation. He spoke a very short gatha, or like a verse. And so Geshe said he doesn't have the exact words of this verse in front of him, but he's going to look up these words and we will share them next time, because Jado Rinpoche has said that if we recite those words before eating, but especially before we take medicine, that they have a special power. And these are not a mantra, it's not a practice of tantra. These are actually words, a gatha from a sutra that are said to be very powerful.
So then
after the Buddha recited this verse, he told all of the assembly to eat their food. And everybody experienced that food as extremely delicious. So not only was the poisonous factor of the food completely purified, but they also experienced the food as delicious. And so, Geshe is just saying this as sort of a gateway to a discussion. There are various ways to transform offerings by realized beings. And in terms of his discussion about how the poor tasting food offered to the Buddha is experienced as delicious, you can find this discussion in the 4th chapter of the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Ornament of Clear Realization. So it explains a set of 22 and 80 points in this chapter. 32. 32 and 80 points. Sorry, Dave, next question.
Right, so the 2 questions from Facebook. First one is from Martha. She asks, what is the reason why it is not advisable to eat onion or garlic in tantric practices?
Great. Triwa Tambodi, Nanso Nak Nanglola, Perna Tsong Dang Jinso Dapo, onion, and what was the other one, Dave?
Garlic.
Garlic. Yeah, Tsong Dang Jadi Masai Gimsen Kareres. So Geshe said that just to be clear, this is not the case in all classes of Tantra, but it is the case especially in the class of Kriya or action Tantra. And that is because in Kriya Tantra, outer conduct is considered the most important. And for that reason, cleanliness is important. So you don't want to consume strong smelling things. So in highest yoga or Anuttara yoga tantra, actually you don't have to worry about these things so much. Yeah. Because we know that part of highest yoga tantra practice is really transforming seemingly unpleasant things into the nature of bliss. So for that reason, it's not so important. But to answer Martha's question, in the first class of tantra, kriya or action tantra, outer conduct is considered extremely important. And so for that reason, there's a strong standard of cleanliness, and not eating any unpleasant things. Was there another one, Dave?
Yes. Yeah, this question from Carol. Thank you so much for these beautiful teachings, Geshe and Venerable Kedrup. Questions. Apologies, I didn't understand the nature, aspect, and function of the unsurpassable offerings. Only the cause arising from aspirations, vows, and concentrations of Arya Bodhisattvas. Then she asks a second question. Can we repeat our offerings with, for instance, one bunch of flowers until they start to fade, or do we need to have fresh flowers daily?
Yeah, so Carol, we will take the second one first, because I think that's the easier one. And then I think it's good to go over the nature, the aspect, the function, and so forth. So we'll do that. But let's deal with the first one first. Metok yuna roa nanso metok puldu dene tema rere sarpa nyogo gereduas nanso metok yaboshik nima ngatruk yabo dena nanso nima rere yarpu chogirebesa. So as long as the flowers are fresh, you can offer them again, Geshe said. That's all right.
So, and
Geshe said that the way you do that is you think of those offerings that are actually set out, but you imagine similar beautiful flowers that kind of fill the extent of space and become very vast. And in that way, you kind of make the offering newly. So Geshe said, if you have the wealth or the means to offer fresh flowers every day, Geshe would encourage you to offer the fresh flowers every day. But if you don't have the wealth or the means to do that, then you can do as Geshe described. And Geshe explained also that part of the reason that we offer water, right, is that it is not a great cost to us. And so especially with water and similar things, we should offer those freshly every day.
야, 나도 그만 비시에 사이바스. 거기 주준이 그 시마다. 시마.
Yeah, yeah.
시마 좀어때는 내 여기가 손지페비 가시라.
Yeah, yeah.
시마 거로 달라.
Yeah.
칼라서노토네 손지를 피니 거도 내자지 뭐 가능성.
So Geshe said, you know, a lot of what's behind it is the motivation. And he reminds you of the story of the two boys that put like some soil or some sand in the Buddha's bowl, thinking of it as food, and the great accumulation of merit that they achieved from that. Yeah, one of them became a wheel-turning king in India on the basis of that. So Shariputra, or one of the Buddha's other disciples, that he tried to stop the children from offering that into the Buddha's bowl, but the Buddha, understanding the power of the motivation, he allowed them to make the offering. And because it was two children, Geshe said, and the Buddha was very tall, they weren't able to reach his alms bowl. So one sort of crawled on the ground, the other got on his shoulders, and in this way they reached the offering. So the offering was sand or dust, but the children really had this idea that it was food in their minds, and so they accumulated that merit. So the one who actually put the sand in the bowl, he became this like wheel-turning king, and the one who was supporting him on his shoulders, he became like a deva, some sort of deity that helped that king. Yeah. Then it nganso mo nampa gyudang dinso yabo komasonas dinso yangarsun reches.
Yeah, more serial that you just enough.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So Geshe said, in the case of the unsurpassable offerings, what makes them different from the point of view of the cause is that they do not arise connected with karma and affliction. They arise only from the roots of virtue. Their nature is that they are not in the nature of suffering. They are not in the nature of suffering. Their aspect or their appearance is that they are faultless. They are completely beautiful and faultless. Their function is to bring forth uncontaminated bliss in the minds of the beings that receives the offering. Yeah. So offering the flowers brings first that pleasant appearance to the eye sense faculty, which then brings forth that pleasant experience in the mind. So that's a brief overview of that. Are there any other questions?
Minoshi, you go ahead. Minoshi, you go first. Minoshi.
Oh, yeah, that's all.
So
Go ahead, Minoshi.
Finished?
Go ahead, Minoshi.
Minoshi, I don't hear you.
Can you hear you? Something's
funny.
wrong with your volume.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll go.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, Lisa, go ahead. We'll get Minoshi
Okay.
after, no problem.
Okay. I wanted to ask, because I guess I wanted to have a stable 7-limb practice, and I don't have a stable 7-limb practice, and just wondering like how I can implement that. I feel like I'm kind of like scrambling a little bit when it comes to my 7-limb practice, and I'm just wondering if you could give me maybe like a method of being able to do that, an outline somehow, you know?
Yeah, so yenla dundi ko nyamlen tempo chik yongi mendua then it Yenlak dun lelapo droya di sikta wachi gere base, tapta wachi gere base, di kandes chikso gresa.
Mi yala di minole lamando man chido solo kachi yarwa.
Lama choba di roa.
Mara tinu suje ngres tati. Kachi gamu shasu yarfes.
Yeah. So Geshe said that in terms of a method, then you can just use the verses from the King of Prayers, for example.
This way.
Yenlak kakisori.
Ye tama ten tata yarchas.
Tama sana metok dampa,
Mara tigo te mazma.
napsa dampa, chupa kangnam,
Mara tigo mes. Yala chawa yala gitana.
ale yenlak dun sarjone. Yeah. So there is a verse at the very end of the practice of the 7 limbs where all of the 7 limbs are contained within one verse. So Geshe is going to find the verse for me and I'll tell you it in English. Sorry. It's quite a way. Yeah. So there is a verse in the dedication. What little virtue I have gathered through my homage, through offering, confessing, and rejoicing, through exhortation and prayer, all of it, I dedicate to the enlightenment of all beings. So if you recite that verse with mindfulness, you can do all of the 7 limbs just in that verse. Yeah, so you see here, it mentions the homage, offering, and confession. So that's 3 of them. Rejoicing, exhortation, prayer. And the final one, I dedicate to the enlightenment of all beings. That dedication is the last of the 7 limbs. So if you just recite a verse like that regularly, that's a complete practice. Yeah, so Geshe said actually, like what you could do, like when you have holidays or whatever, is just memorize this. Yeah, so Geshe said, like when you're working at home or whatever, at the end of your task, if you just recite this verse, then you're continuously practicing the 7 limbs.
Also, so what do I find? Is there a page number?
Page 5.
Thank you. I don't have, there's a new text that FPMT.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
I don't have that, but yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
So page 5, yeah.
Yeah,
Geshe said this is a really easy practice because it's a short verse and it's very easy to recite.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there anything else, Dave, on the oh, Manoshi has something. Yeah, go ahead, Manoshi.
Yes, hello. I was just wondering, I've heard teaching on when you make offering practice that it's good to think about, I forget how many rounds, the giving, the emptiness of the self, the emptiness of the object, the emptiness of who you're offering it to in the action of offering. Yeah. So how that would play into this categorization of, surpassable and unsurpassable, and if it does relate.
Now, so yeah, I know it's a good question. And also the lana yobadang lana mepa chubagi yewadi yeres roa. Then nganso some chuba puldu. Then nganso chuba gizedi tombares. Ngarang chuba pulgen chombayeres roa. Kebu dampa di yang. Rangjingi drupa mares, Tompa sumdin so yeres, Tompa sumdin so gigune, Lana yopa, Lana mepa chaya yere ebesa.
Oh, that you chayaris today.
Chayaris. So Geshe said that if one is realized in emptiness, if one is like I just want to get the exact delineation of when this works.
Yeah.
So Geshe said if you are an Arya Bodhisattva, right, who has realized emptiness, then thinking of these 3 emptiness of the offering, the one who offers, and the being that receives the offering, that can transform the surpassable offering into the unsurpassed offering. We definitely can and should think about these things as ordinary beings. But without that realization, we don't yet have the power through that to change that from a surpassable into an unsurpassable offering.
This way, oh, that's all. So, what the deal with Tony? Yeah, because mummy people in the nature of your ina. Because mummy basic. Mummy ba.
Yes.
Yes. So do I.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a mummy because we remember so not only pena.
Yeah.
And maybe show is that we won't do it.
So Geshe said that, but definitely in the text, it talks about like this non-referential understanding. So the understanding of the lack of inherent existence of the one who makes the offering itself, and the one who receives this offering can transform that into an unsurpassable offering.
Oh,
So we, from our side, don't yet have the realization to actually transform it like the flowers that are sitting in front of Geshe, but we definitely can, and it's very beneficial to think about the emptiness of those flowers as we offer them. Yeah, so there's also a different kind of delineation of the offerings between the offerings that are within the world and the offerings that are sort of separated from the world. So it's beneficial to think when we make the offerings that they lack inherent existence, because that contemplation of their lack of inherent existence as we make the offerings acts as an antidote to samsara. So although we might not actually be able to transform them, it's still something that's very beneficial. And so when we think about the emptiness of the offering in this way, it becomes the a practice of the two accumulations, of the accumulation of both merit and wisdom. Did that answer your question, Manoshi?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
So
Geshe said probably we will end it for today, and I look forward to seeing some of you Saturday, and I look forward to seeing. Oh, sorry, Geshe said, Dave, is there anything else?
That's it.
That's it. Okay, yeah. So I guess we'll end it here for today. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. If anyone contacts you not being able to join today, please provide them the new link. And look forward to seeing some of you Saturday and everybody on Sunday. And just remember, Sunday, we go into our daylight savings time here. So we will start an hour later. Thank you so much. So thank you very much from Geshe Tashidele to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.